In this chapter, chapter 2, we're going to be going over personality, stress, learning, and perception. Now, in this chapter, there's a series of instruments you want to complete as far as exercises are concerned. These are not things that need to be submitted or anything like that. The whole idea behind this is to get a better understanding as far as where it is that you're at, what it is that you prefer as far as some of these things are concerned. I'm not going to be going over all of that in the video. One of the things I ask you to do is do the instruments and then read over in the chapter what it means after you actually go through the instrument. That'll give you an idea as far as some of your preferences, the things that you want to do, where your personality kind of stands. Now, in the chapter, we're going to be talking about several things. We're going to be looking at the Big Five, stress personality types. We're going to be looking at Myers-Briggs. We're going to be looking at our different learning styles and some of the biases and things that actually impact some of the perceptions that we have. Now, our personality are those stable traits, set of traits that helps us explain and predict behavior. Now, our personality kind of starts when we're young. By the time we're about 5 or so, our personality is starting to really kind of be formed. Now, there are changes as we age and as we grow and mature. The thing is, our basic personality is kind of set up at that point in time. Now, there's different ways of classifying the personalities that we might have. We're going to be looking at several things. Things like type A and B, and then locus of control, and what that really means. Big Five, and then the Myers-Briggs. Now, a type A personality is one of those people who, as it says there, a heart attack looking for a place to happen. They're hard charging, they are competitive, they want to make sure that they get stuff done now. The type B is the opposite. They tend to be much more easygoing, laid back, and that sort of thing. Now, the locus of control is one that I really, really like. And the reason is because it gives you an idea as far as where you tend to place blame and what kind of control you feel you have. So this is one of those instruments. If you would please make sure you complete it and then go back and look over the explanation for it in the text. Then you have the Big Five. There's 5 key things in the Big Five. Another assessment where you go through, you answer the questions, and it will tell you where your preferences are. So again, go through that and then read over the explanation for it in the text. Then you have the Myers-Briggs. All right, with the Myers-Briggs, now this is something that's been around for a long time. Again, what it's doing is it's looking at what your preferences are and where it is that you prefer to actually act and work out. Again, go through the instrument, then read over the information in the text to get a better understanding of what it's really all about. Now, there are some similarities as far as the Myers-Briggs and the Big Five. In the Myers-Briggs, you have your introversion versus extroversion, okay? That's the I and the E. All right, you have your S and N, T and F, J and P. And you have the combination of those things. Now, how that lines up with the Big Five, Myers-Briggs doesn't have anything for the adjustment, all right, as far as the Big Five is concerned. And the Big Five goes from resilience to reactive. For sociability or surgency, that's kind of the IE. It's not exactly, it's kind of like it. The openness is kind of like the sensor and the intuitor for the Myers-Briggs. For agreeableness, you're kind of looking at the thinker and the feeler. And for conscientiousness, the judging and the perceiver. And so that's kind of how they line up. Now, you see these little X's here, okay? Those are my scores in the Big Five. In other words, one of the things I did was I took the Big Five, a longer version of what you're looking at there, and these are where my scores fell. A lot of resilience, very high in extroversion, high in explorer, adapter, and then kind of in the middle as far as focused. It is very much like my scores on the Myers-Briggs. I'm high E, very much an extrovert, a high N, very much an intuitor. My feeler is more in this area here as far as the Myers-Briggs is concerned. And then in perceiving and judging, I'm pretty much right in the middle, and any one given day I could go either way. So this is kind of how those things line up between the Myers-Briggs and the Big Five. Again, it's not exact. The thing is, it's close to it. That gives you kind of an idea as far as where they stand. Now, stress. Everybody deals with stress at some point in time, and everybody deals with it differently. Stressors are those things that gives us some of that tension and we feel pressure on. And it's very objective, because what one person sees as very stressful, another person may not. And there are different stress types. Again, this is one of those instruments you want to go through, complete it, and then look over the responses to that and the explanation for it in the book. Now, there are some pros and some cons to stress. It's okay to experience a little bit of stress. It's not a problem. Many times, having some stress actually gets us motivated to go and do things that we wouldn't have done before. The problem is if the stress becomes too much for too long. That's when you start having health problems. People fall into alcohol and drug problems because they're having a difficult time dealing with it, this sort of thing. It's okay to experience some stress, particularly like at the end of a semester or something. You have finals coming up, you're going to have some stress. The thing is, it gets you motivated to go and do more, to get going as far as studying and doing some of the other things. However, too much of it can be very detrimental to your health. Some of the causes of work-related stress are things like, first of all, our personality types. Stress comes from within us. We determine what level of stress we're able to put up with or what we cannot handle. Organizational climate, in other words, what's it like as far as where it is that we're working? Is the overall morale low or high? What is it that's actually going on with the organization? Are we going through downsizings? Are there problems as far as within the organization? This sort of thing. Then you have management behavior. You may have a manager who is not exactly your favorite person, and that could cause quite a bit of stress. And then also the degree of job satisfaction that we may have. If we have a job that we really appreciate, that we really enjoy, we'll be able to handle more stress than if it's something that we absolutely detest doing on a day-to-day basis. And we need to identify what are some of those signs of stress that we may be experiencing. You have your physical signs. In other words, you might be getting ill or experiencing ulcers. I've seen people who gave themselves ulcer because they were concerned about being laid off, things like this. Then the mental and emotional feelings of stress or signs of stress. In other words, just a feeling of being overwhelmed, and you don't know where to go next. You don't know what to start on working next. And there could be the issue of burnout. In other words, where you just say, to heck with it, I'm done. One of the things we need to think about is controlling our stress. How are we doing that? The first thing is identify the stressors. What are the things that are actually causing us that stress? Second, determine what that cause is. Is it something that's internal? Are we putting it on ourselves? Is it something that's coming from external? And then you start to make a plan on what it is that you can do to eliminate some of those causes. Some of the things that we can do to decrease the stress we have. First of all, getting some exercise. One of the primary things that we can do is get moving. What it does is it gets the various brain chemicals going, and it helps us to kind of relax, gets the oxygen flowing through the body. It makes it much easier for us to handle some of the stress. Next, make sure you're eating right. All right, getting the right amount of a balanced diet, cutting back on some of the portions that we may have, and getting rid of the junk. Relaxation. In other words, finding ways to relax, to take your mind off some of the things, get the body relaxed. Positive thinking. Those who are optimistic are able to handle their stress much better. And then also having a support system, having people that we can rely on, that we can talk to, can really help control some of the stress that we have. Then we start getting into the idea of intelligence. Now, there's a lot of different intelligences out there. So, for example, you have mathematical, and music is very much in line with that mathematical. You have spatial, you have word, okay, or verbal. There's a lot of different intelligences that are out there. And basically, it's the level of one's capacity for new learning. And it can be a predictor for some of the outcomes that we have. Okay, what kind of education that we attain, things like this. Then you have the idea of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence. Now, there's 5 components to it. The first 3 are internal. In other words, knowing yourself, managing your emotions, and then getting yourself motivated to do some things. These are all internal. Then you have the external. In other words, what it is that you're doing with others. Empathy, in other words, feeling what others feel, being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, walking a mile in their shoes. And then also social skills. What can you do to build positive relationships? So when we start talking about emotional intelligence, those 5 key things are very, very important. Then you also get in the idea of learning and learning styles. Different people learn different ways. There's another instrument for you to complete. You can go through and identify what your learning style is. And again, go through the text and read over, after you complete it, read over what the various scores mean. Then you have the idea of perception, okay? We see the world as we are, not as it actually is. Now, see, it's our interpretation of what reality is, all right? No 2 people are going to see the same thing. You might see something as good, I see it as bad. We perceive things differently. And our perception is based on a lot of these things here. What have we experienced in the past? How were we raised? What are some of the needs that we have? We might be hungry and we'll perceive something differently than if we weren't, this sort of thing. We also have to be aware of the biases that we have when we're looking at these ideas of perception. We have a lot of different biases. Now, for example, stereotyping, that generalizing the behavior of a particular group. Frame of reference. We see only those things as they affect us. In other words, the brain is absolutely amazing. It can shut out a lot of different stimuli that we may be experiencing throughout the day. And what will happen is we will perceive something when it's important to us, that frame of reference. Our expectations can bias the way we actually see things. Selective exposure, or selective, just picking out what it is that we want and ignoring what it is that we don't want. Many people do that with the news that they read and things like that. They have a particular slant, they have a particular preference. They only go to those areas and not the areas that they disagree with. And then also our interest, how well we might like something or not, will impact our bias in the way we see things. One of the other things to think about is what's called perceptual congruence, okay? That is how you and I see things the same. Now, anytime we can start getting more of that congruence going, the better off it's going to be as far as our relationships are concerned. And when we're dealing with perceptions, we also have that idea of first impressions, where our biases can come into play and some of the other things. So, for example, you have what's called the primacy effect. In other words, the first thing that you see or the first thing that you experience tends to color all of your other impressions and perceptions. You have your 4-minute barrier. That's how much time it takes to actually make a good impression. And then some say only 6 seconds. In other words, that first 6 seconds that you meet somebody, they're making having an impression of you, and it's not going to change. Image projection. In other words, how people project their attitudes toward us and what it is that we project towards them. In other words, you may have an image that you want to project to someone as being very well to do, you will dress a particular way for that, trying to impress and change some of the perceptions that somebody may have. Our appearance is going to impact the first impressions that we have. Are you dressed well? Are you dressed sloppily? Are you well groomed? Are you not? Are you speaking well or are you not? Our nonverbals. In other words, are we comfortable with talking with other people? Are we looking them in the eye or are we looking away? Is our body language showing that we're not interested or are we showing that we are interested? And then we have our actual behavior. Are we listening? Are we agreeable with people? Do we actually come across as likable? So these are some things that can impact our first impressions. So again, go back, review the instruments as far as the Myers-Briggs, the locus of control, the big five, and the learning, and then also your stress. See where it is that you stand on those things. And again, remember, these are preferences. There is no good or bad as far as those instruments are concerned. They just are. And it'll give you an idea as far as where you stand, as far as your personality, and what it is that others might see also. So these are some of the key points. If you have questions, please give me a shout.